America, we stand for freedom.
Good evening and welcome to Your Right to Know by the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. My name is Mary Lotze and I will be your host for this evening's show. Tonight we're going to explore the Second Amendment. There's a lot of discussion about the Second Amendment. What does it mean? What did our founding fathers mean? And there's a lot of myths around what the founding fathers meant and around all of the issues regarding the Second Amendment and the possession of guns. So we're going to explore that tonight. Tonight I have two very good friends of mine and returning guest. I have Andrew Jeleniewski from Templeton. Andrew is the owner, proprietor of the Minuteman Armory gun shop. Welcome and thank you for coming back again this month and being with us. And I also have, of course, my co-host who's going to be tonight, our guest, and that's Attorney Andrew Couture, who's going to be able to talk to us about some of the constitutional issues, the legal issues regarding guns, gun ownerships, and what the founding fathers meant. So let's get on with our show, and thank you both for coming out in this horrible weather and horrible night. So let's sort of start with the Constitution, since that's kind of where this issue all begins. There's the Second Amendment of the Constitution, and I just want to quote from it so I have it right. But there's a lot of controversy around the Second Amendment of what the Founding Fathers meant, because this is the statement: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I know as a gun shop owner and a lawyer, you've heard these expressions numerous times. What does it mean? There are many people out there who believe that what this means is that there will be a militia. That's it. No one else except for maybe hunting to eat would have the right to have, or target shooting, maybe skeet shooting, something like that, would have a right to have a gun. So why don't we explore a little of that? Andrew, why don't you go first?
Well, the original intent of the Founding Fathers was to protect the citizens against the government. I mean, the first act of the British in the Revolutionary War was to try to disarm the colonists. Mm-hmm. And the Founding Fathers put this in there knowing that if a government gets too big, they're going to try to overreach and try to control the citizens. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a lot of people, and I think one problem that you need to talk about when you start quoting the what the actual Constitution says about the Second Amendment, you have a lot of textbooks that reword the Second Amendment. Uh-huh. There are many instances where you have that you know, a well-regulated militia is changed to say, you know, the Army or the police or something right. like that. They
Army, police, National Guard.
What they do is they play with the words, and they're trying to teach the younger generations that this isn't what it actually says. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, you look, that's what it was intended, and that's the black letter of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And you know, a lot of people say, well, the Founding Fathers never intended to think about what we have today when you're dealing with the ARs or when you're dealing with what's called the high capacity firearms. Well, in 1722, they had something that was called the puckle gun, and that was well before, you know, the Constitution. And that was termed the first machine gun. So the Founding Fathers knew that there were these ideas and new ideas on firearms. You know, there were repeating rifles, even before, you know, the Wild Wild West, where you had, you know, allegedly the first repeating rifles. No, it was back then. So yes, they did have the foresight to know what's coming, and that's why they put it in here.
Morgan, when people come to buy guns or weapons of any kind, what are the reasons they come to purchase a weapon? Hunting? Is it for self-protection? Why do people come in and buy different types of weapons?
You find pretty much any reason you can find to buy any gun that you can come up with. any reason that you could think would be otherwise rational, and certainly some irrational reasons. There are certainly hunters. There are certainly a lot of self-defense people. There are people who just enjoy shooting. Basically, any reason you can come up with for owning a gun, somebody's got a reason for it. Especially in light of recent events in the state with the Attorney General, we've had a shocking amount of people coming in saying, we have three primary reasons now. Is one, something someone's been saving for and they don't know what's going to happen next, so they're going to get it now. We have a shocking amount of people coming in saying, I'm just here to make a statement. So
now, are you speaking of specifically to the
Attorney General
Attorney General's actions? Could you explain to our viewers what that was?
Recently, she has decided to reinterpret the state laws and enforce them.
This is Attorney General Maura Healey.
Attorney General Maura Healey has decided to reinterpret the state law as she sees fit. And despite the fact that the way the state has been following these laws for the last almost 20 years at this point, she's reinterpreting how she's going to enforce these laws. And unilaterally made these decisions, and basically has attempted to outlaw, in effect, every semi-automatic weapon. It hasn't quite worked out that way, fortunately, but the most popular weapons certainly have been outlawed recently, or functionally outlawed. So a lot of people are coming in saying, listen, I'm just buying something to remind her that we're out here, we're buying stuff, and we're displeased.
So that was almost like a protest purchase.
There's a lot of people who come in and say that exactly. And then finally, there's certainly no shortage of people who are concerned about personal defense for some reason or another, be it they live in a sketchy neighborhood, or there seems to be a growing distrust in the government and whether or not they can be protected by the forces that be from whomever might be.
I think just recently, within the last number of weeks, we had a heinous murder and severe injury of an elder couple out in a very small, bucolic Orange, Massachusetts. And I think this is the drugs. And possibly the drug problem has people on edge because you're not safe in your own home anymore. So this myth or this feeling that I didn't have to lock my doors, you realize that even if you lock your doors, there's an element out there that will come in and kill you for 25 cents. And if you had a weapon for self-defense, you could protect yourself. So you do have a lot of people who come in just for self-protection that at one time probably never thought, I'd never be a gun owner.
By far and away, our most popular firearm in the store is concealed carry pistols, by far. Not even close to anything else. That is by far the most popular at the moment, and it has been really since we've opened. After that, it's a tend of a hodgepodge. When hunting season comes around, hunting shotguns primarily take over. But people are not shy about saying, listen, I'm concerned about defending myself and my family.
They tell you why when they go to buy.
And we tend to be a very female-friendly shop, but there's an incredible amount of women who are just getting into the sport and getting into being concerned about protecting themselves and understanding that it's 2016. I'm a woman and I can own a gun, and I'm okay with that. So we do safety classes regularly, and probably for the last year or so, probably 40 to 60% of any class is women.
Okay, let me ask you about the safety class. Is this a license to carry course?
It's one of the mandatory. The state requires at least one class before you're allowed to apply for your license. There are several classes that are available. We have several different instructors who offer any number of variants of the class, but it is a class required to apply for your Class A or your FID for that matter.
Well, then, both of you, this is another myth that people can just walk off the street, go into your shop and say, I'm so afraid of being alone in my house at night, I want to buy a gun. What's the first question you're going to ask me if I say I want to buy a gun?
We don't care if they have a license when they come in. You're allowed to come in and handle all the firearms you want, whether you have a license or not.
Okay.
But the moment you say, I want this, the first question is, you have your license and PIN number. In Massachusetts, we need a PIN number, but that's a different conversation. But if you don't have your license, the conversation sort of stops at that point on their
Okay.
ability to purchase.
So if I do not have a license to carry,
You don't need a license to carry, but you need a license.
a license, okay, so a license, what is, it's just called a gun license?
Well, there are many different classifications, well, a few different classifications, I should say. You have your FID card. There's two.
The B is gone.
The B is gone, but you have a license to carry live ammo.
It's a license to carry. There used to be a Class B and a Class A. The Class B is gone. There's only a Class A now.
only now.
However, they're generally referred to as a Class A, and then you can have restrictions, so you may not be able to carry a weapon on your person concealed.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's up to the discretion of the licensing authority in the town which you live.
And that would be up to then the discretion of your city or town?
The
local
licensing
police
officer, be it the
chief
police
or?
chief, the
Correct.
chief of police or whomever it is.
Now, I just want to go back to Attorney General Maura Healey. This happened approximately July 20th, where she came out with this proclamation. And it happened just like that for store owners. And there was something very interesting, or maybe ironic, that happened that day. When Attorney General Maura Healey made this immediate proclamation that was effective the end of your business day or by midnight, whatever, that particular day, that same day, all of a sudden, this kind of spread through the state's social media system like wildfire. And all of a sudden, a weapon that probably you only sold X number per year, all of a sudden sold out like that. Could you explain what happened in your experience of that day?
Basically, out of the blue, there was a newspaper article in, I don't honestly remember the paper, but I'm going to say the Globe, but I don't honestly recall, that basically she proclaimed that she was going to be banning, we're just going to say banning ARs, but it was a series of weapons. She was going to be banning ARs. That started to leak out pretty quick. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, I started getting phone calls, personal phone calls, and the shop phone, of course, went crazy. We happened to be closed that day. Myself and one of my partners decided that we should probably hang out in the shop, and people just started flooding in. And in short, we sold everything that we had, which was a reasonable assortment. Plus, we cleaned out 2 shops in New Hampshire that came down to support us with firearms that they had. They basically just rolled down in trucks and sold everything we had. My understanding is that some of the other shops, some of the bigger shops than us, had 2 and 3 hour lines outside their doors waiting for people to get in. The estimate was that last year in the state, approximately 10,000 ARs were sold. That day alone, there were better than 2,700 sold.
That day alone, in one day. So her goal to restrict this weapon, this type of weapon, was really almost
backfired pretty spectacularly.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Now, what is it about this type of weapon that would make someone do this? It's just a weapon. What made the politicians fear this weapon? Is this what's used on the streets of Chicago
it's
and
A
the
fundamental
big cities?
misunderstanding of reality.
Absolutely. It's allegedly the way it looks, and nothing more. I mean, an AR, would fire the same round that your grandfather's rifle would fire, depending on what caliber it is. There's no difference. I've heard ridiculous things that, it speeds up the bullet. That's ridiculous. A bullet is a bullet. No matter what rifle you put it in, it's going to fire. There's no difference. And basically, they don't like the look of the gun. It's big, it's black, it's scary, and they don't like it. And that's it. They want to get rid of it, and they want to get rid of your right to own it.
But it's not just a gun really called an AR-15.
That's legally, that's a specific
It is.
weapon.
Yes.
But it's generally referred to as a pattern that other guns are modeled after as well.
Okay, so it's these other guns that all were kind of enveloped into
Yes.
this.
Yes. Yeah. It's kind. Would you say it's the model of the gun? Because many different companies make that model, so to speak, of
The
gun.
original was an AR-15, was called an AR-15.
Okay.
Since then, we just refer to guns that are cosmetically similar as an AR pattern rifle, meaning
Okay.
they share compatible bits and pieces.
Okay.
They may not literally share a single compatible part, but we typically just refer to as an AR as an AR pattern rifle.
Now, let me ask you this, because we've been very involved in politics, the Fitchburg Republican City Committee.
Absolutely, we have.
And certainly, we've gone to hear so many different political speeches, and we've watched the debates and all. And one of the things that keeps coming out is, I'm going to close the gun show loophole. Can you tell me what is the gun show loophole?
It's a fallacy.
Okay,
I mean,
explain.
If
From
you
a
go,
legal
if you go to a gun
layman's
show,
perspective.
if you go to a gun show, you have to have the same forms done. You have to show the same ID, the same way if I were to walk into Morgan's store and purchase a firearm.
So I cannot go to my local Centrum if they're having a gun shop, see a very pretty pink weapon and say, Morgan, I want that pretty pink weapon. You're going to ask me the same question. I can touch it, I can feel it, I can look at it, but I cannot buy it.
You have to be
unless
licensed.
I have.
You have to be licensed exactly the same as if you were in a store. The theory behind the gun show loophole is that you as a person can just walk into a gun show and walk over to someone and buy a gun. If you were to do that, it's just as illegal if you were to do it on the street. It's no different.
So when you say that, rather than going to a booth for Minuteman Armory, we'll say, at a gun show, I would sort of go up to you,
If
Morgan Jeleniewski, and say, Morgan, can I buy a gun under the table?
Right.
This is what it's. So that is illegal.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the same as if you were to walk over to Andy and say, "Hey, Andy, I'd like to buy a gun," and you don't have a license. If he sells you that firearm, that's just as federally illegal as if you were to do it here in the studio or as if you did it at a gun show. There is the gun show loophole. It's not a real thing.
Okay.
It doesn't actually exist.
Is this true in every state, or is it state law that might change in different states? Do you know?
Different states have different rules. Most states have no licenses. So if you walk up to a person and you want to buy a gun from them, it's private property, it's cash and carry, have a nice day, that's the way it is. We as Massachusetts residents can go to other states and buy long guns over the counter.
And when you say long guns, you mean rifles?
Rifle or a shotgun. Over the counter from a store, but if we buy it from a private person, it has to go through at least one federally licensed dealer.
A dealer.
Same with pistols. Any handgun. Even if I went to New Hampshire, not me, but if Andy went to New Hampshire, picked out a pistol, it has to go from that FFL to me as an FFL, and I would then ensure that it's a compliant, transferable firearm. So there's, if you were to drive up to New Hampshire, for example, ask somebody to buy a gun, they sold it to you, and you drove home with it, there are federal rules that have been broken.
Okay, so I think the bottom line then for this discussion that we've just had then, if you are a law-abiding citizen and you follow the rules, the state laws, the federal laws, you will not buy a gun without the proper paperwork. You will not be sold a gun without the proper paperwork.
No.
Let me then turn this question, because one of the things that so many people fear, and we hear every day, unfortunately, is the turmoil of our large cities. Chicago, I don't even know that you lose track of the numbers of deaths and shootings every weekend.
Yeah, hundreds every weekend.
Hundreds. Over a long weekend, you will have several hundred. I mean, what's happening in some of our big cities with weapons? So what's happening? Where are these people getting guns from? They're obviously not law-abiding citizens.
Well, I mean, obviously they're buying them off the streets, where in these cities have some of the most strictest gun laws in the country. Chicago, you named Chicago, Detroit. Anywhere that there is a lot of gun violence, you see the strictest gun control laws around. Does it help? No. In fact, there was a county in Georgia, it was back in the 90s, where, and forgive me, I forget the name of the county, but there was a county in Georgia who basically said, unless you have a religious problem with it, everybody in the county has to own a gun, learn how to use a gun and own a gun. And the crime rate plummeted. And that's what gun control, the criminals know, if you're a lawful citizen, you're not going to have a gun. So that's why they take advantage of it.
Well, and just before the show, we were speaking of the experience of the Japanese general during, before World War II or as World War II.
It was during World War II.
During World War II. Could you just cite that for our viewers so they will have a sense of what disarming our citizenry using the Second Amendment?
Well, it was said that they were discussing the invasion of mainland United States. And a general said there would never be an invasion of the mainland United States because behind every blade of grass there will be a gun. And basically what the politicians, the liberal politicians are doing now they are disarming the citizenry. And they're forcing children and even millennials have this unnatural fear of firearms because that's what they've been brought up with. You know, you fear the firearms. But we're basically creating a society of, I don't want to say, but it's, you know, weaklings. You know, and should we, and with everything that's going on with Russia, North Korea, you know, even Iran now, you know, could there be an invasion of the mainland United States? Yeah. Would we still have people like myself and Morgan who would, you know, rise up and be the future Minutemans? Yeah, there are people there, but not as many as there should be or have been.
I think one of the other fears about the whole gun issue is mental illness. And when we look at some of the worst things that have happened in our country with guns, and so as we go through and have this discussion, I don't want our viewers at all to think that we're trying to, that we have a lack of respect for a weapon and what a carnage a weapon could truly do, because it can. But one of the things that seems to go past laws and past rules and regulations that are in place for safety of handling weapons seems to be, to me, mental illness. And I just want to cite a couple of cases. We had Gabby Giffords, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, was shot by someone by the name of Jared Lee Loeffner in Tucson. We had Adam Lanza, terrible carnage in the school of Sandy Hook in Connecticut. James Holmes, everybody remembers that clown-type figure in the Aurora movie theater over the Black Night. Granted, it was the inappropriate use of guns, and they certainly weren't using licensed weapons, if I'm not mistaken. But there was also the element of mental illness that was involved in these people having guns. In other words, somehow these guns got into the hands of someone with mental illness. Now, when we're licensing people, you obviously, as a store owner, have no idea when someone comes in to buy a weapon, if they're mentally ill. The only thing you can go on is their license. If they have the proper paperwork and present well, you will sell them a weapon. How do we protect that element, or is there a way in the law to protect people who've had maybe a history of dangerousness?
Yeah, there currently is. There currently is. That's a question when you fill out an application to get your license to carry. You know, have you been diagnosed with any mental illness? In my practice in Methuen, I deal with people who have licensing problems.
Yes.
And I've had to apply for licenses for individuals. And that is a question that they ask. And, it is against federal law to lie on something like that. Is that stopping somebody from lying on the form? But that's what they do have local, control, where if the sheriff if the chief of police doesn't think that you're qualified to own a firearm. Now, I think that is an overreach, but I'd rather see it at a local level than at a national level. I don't know what you would say about that, Morgan.
My thoughts on mental illness. I have a severe issue with it, and the biggest reason is because there's no way to define what it is.
Sure.
Certain places, California in particular, have said if you are a former soldier and you have PTSD, you are not eligible, you should not own a firearm. Do they have a mental problem, mental illness? Probably not. More to the point, defining whether or not someone has mental illness is purely subjective.
Sure it is.
If you're a physician, you're anti-gun, and Andy comes into you, geez, I had a bad day, I'm having a bad day every day because you've got some rough clients, and you need, and I'm just picking on Andy because you're right next to me.
That's fine.
You need some Prozac because you can't handle some of the people you have to deal with. Well, now you can be easily deemed no longer viable, no longer allowed to own a firearm because you have a mental illness because you're on Prozac,
Right.
because you have a ridiculously stressful job and you're forced to deal with some of the special folks in society.
Yeah.
So the short answer is, as far as I'm concerned, if you've never been a felon, you should have a firearm, end of discussion. The way that the Constitution, the way that we are supposed to be governed is maximum responsibility, maximum rights, maximum responsibility. So I have a real issue with the alleged mental illness concept.
But I mean, you mentioned soldiers with PTSD. I mean, there are they go for shooting therapy, you know, where they go target shooting, and it's therapeutic to the guys coming back, or the men and women coming back from overseas. You know, it is there is a relaxing type of
one of the
response to it. You know, it is kind of relaxing.
Almost like any sport,
yeah,
like
any
playing golf
sports.
or tennis or anything. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a concentration and there's a release, literal release when you hit a target or get a good score or whatever. I mean, there is a positive reinforcement that makes you feel good because you've been disciplined and you achieve. I hope we were able to shed some light on the whole gun dilemma. Unfortunately, there are no real easy answers for who can have a gun with the mental illness. But I do believe, let me ask you, do you believe there are rules, laws in place to protect for law-abiding for those citizens who are law-abiding, that they will be protected from random people who just get guns?
Yes.
There are something like 22,000 laws on the books. If the laws are simply enforced, if every law was enforced, nobody would be able to get a gun in any conceivable fashion. The biggest problem is we're just selectively enforcing and not enforcing, and in the case of the Attorney General here in Massachusetts, making stuff up on the fly.
Yeah, unilaterally changing the law, which, in my opinion, she has no authority to do. But I guess what they're doing now is the House, the State House, is actually, there has been a state rep who has filed to try to revoke any kind of authority she would have on that.
2 bills for that.
And as an attorney, you may get involved in some of these legal actions.
I may.
I want to thank you both for coming tonight and joining us on Your Right to Know. Morgan, thank you so much again for being with us on the show. And Andrew, of course, you and I will see each other routinely because we're on the show together.
Absolutely.
And look forward to next month. And we thank you, our viewers, for watching Your Right to Know and for sitting in here tonight with the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. We want you to know and remember that your local city or town Republican Committee is your only grassroots organization that supports and holds dear your liberty and your constitutional rights and conservative values. We implore you and encourage you to join us at our meetings. Why? Because to us, the GOP stands for growth, opportunity, and prosperity, and because we always stand for freedom. Thank you and good night.
America, we stand for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values, and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and